Thanks for having me. I'm Damian, and I will talk something about Vue. So I hope, let's just make a quick survey. Who knows something about Vue, heard about it? OK, quite a lot. So who's using Vue? I hope after the presentation there will be more. So I would just want to share one news. We had VueConf, the first international Vue conference. It was in Wrocław, actually, and we were doing a conference in a cinema, and speakers were doing selfies of speakers doing selfies, and I'm actually face-hugging one of the speakers there. It was quite cool. So, but before we talk about Vue, I made stupidly this statement about fiber in the tag description. Probably no one read it, but just to make sure, I would just make a clarification for it. So it stated something along the lines, what are the problems that fiber solves for React that you won't find in Vue? And the answer is quite surprising, because the short answer is none. Yeah, but don't get me wrong. I'm very, very excited about fiber, because actually the slightly longer answer is that fiber, because it's a complete rewrite of the stack reconciler, will add quite a meaningful change to what we know about the frameworks, because it will introduce something that we have for years in our operation systems, and we know what the native platform can do. So that's actually super exciting. And Vue doesn't have it right now, and so it's a problem of Vue. But Vue does something different, and what it does is actually not trying to actually improve renders, but just trying to not do renders at all when it's not needed. And it's actually quite efficient, and there are several things that Vue does for it to make it possible. And we are getting to the point of the presentation. There are some concerns when people hear about Vue and hey, there are templates, and templates are worse than JSX, right? And there are directives. That's probably the worst. You had to learn a DSL in your templates. And there is mutable state. That's the horror. I mean, everything should be immutable right now. And there are swatchers. This is completely dirty. So I would just like to talk about those things a bit. So templates versus JSX. Actually, there is no such thing, because why would you pick if you can use both, right? And there are some cool things about templates, actually. They are limited, and this is actually a good thing, because there is just one thing, one way to write things, and actually it makes it easier to have a consistent code, to have one style guide, how to write things. And because with JSX, you get more power, but it also comes with the fact that if you have a larger team with different skills, the render functions will be quite different. There is a lot of effort in the code reviews to make them better. And yeah, they're easier for beginners, especially for the people that come from HTML and CSS background. It's great for actually the representative components, the dump components, because this is the place that is very simple, usually. They are easier to optimize, and we'll get back to it in a moment. And because, fun fact, templates in Vue are also compiled to render functions. It's all virtual DOM underneath. And yeah, that means you will also get compile time errors and linting if you are using the tools that are good for it. And also, JSX. You can use it. That's probably obvious for you, so I would just move fast. It is flexible, powerful. You can use everything that you could do in JavaScript, actually. They are good for dynamic components, but from my experience, if I have to write dynamic components, I usually just write the render functions with skipping the JSX, because that's not always needed. Unless you're doing this composing stuff, then it is more useful. Yeah, it has better tooling support right now, because you can check types there. It is coming to Vue actually, but not right now. The functionality is quite limited right now. And of course, you got the compile time errors and linting. So what are the optimization steps that you can do, and how it actually is possible? It is possible because, like Jason Miller, the creator of Preact, explains, templates are much easier to statically analyze than JSX. And these are some of the optimizations that Vue does to make the templates faster. Because they are faster, the render functions generated from templates, than render functions, so JSX, written like by hand. And you can hoist static DOM trees. So if there is a fragment of the render function that Vue will know that it only returns the same result each time, it will hoist it outside of the render function and just use it. It won't be diffed. And you can actually force this behavior on the tree with the directive v1s, the pure evil directive. So once it is evaluated, it will also be moved to a static function tree, so it won't be diffed anymore. So if you just need to render some dynamic things that it will be not dynamic once you render them, that's all you need, and you will skip the diffing there. And you don't need to normalize the children. And this is very meta, because if you looked into the compilers of render functions, you will see that you have to always check what are the childrens, like if someone, for some reasons unknown, is passing a nested array of, I don't know, of functions, right? And because you're using templates, you are sure you will always get an array of virtual nodes. And because this is actually very important for server-side rendering, because on the server side you can actually do string concatenation, which will, instead of, because there is no need for virtual DOM on the server side, because there is no diffing there happening. So actually you just need the render function to generate something that will be translated into string and served to the client browser. So string concatenation for templates is actually super useful, because not everything can be moved to used as a string for string concatenation, because some parts of the dynamic things like render, like routing or transition groups or your fancy JSX components that are like more dynamic than the templates can't be optimized in such way. But Vue uses a hybrid model, and usually it has between 2 to 8 times faster performance, which is actually quite important. And I've talked with Vuejs recently, and they told me that they picked Vue because it works so great on the server side, because for the new product they require it. And they considered other options, but it turned out they were worse or something. So, and there are several things you can do with templates, and some of those are event modifiers. That's actually very nice, and it looks like this. Key up is an event triggered when you press a button and like left it. And you can add modifiers like shift or enter. And if you didn't have the modifiers, the add new function would be called whenever you press a button. But if you add those modifiers, it will only trigger on shift and enter. And this is actually quite useful, because you don't want the functions to know what the context, in what context are they called. Like, they don't have to be event handlers. It can be an action or mutation or just a method, a general method that you are using across the component. It is called within other from other sources. And yeah, if you want to prevent default, you can just add .prevent. And you can use your favorite HTML processor. I personally hate closing tags. And usually I just use pug, and I'm very happy with it, actually. So there's another cool thing, which is, you probably know this from Angular 1 or just jQuery. You can use the, you don't need a build step. You can just use the template that was served from, let's say, an raised application, and you can mount Vue on this element, and it will use the template, the code that is within those elements as the template. And this is actually quite useful. This is how GitLab migrated their application from Rails and jQuery to Vue, because they didn't have to rewrite the whole application. They can just add Vue, like they did with jQuery, and just add some new features, And then they moved to Webpack and so on, but it's a way to progressively move your application to the new stack. You don't have to start with a complete rewrite. So, directives. Actually, there are nothing like in AngularJS. You don't have templates for directives. You don't have scope. Actually, a directive can only modify the element it is like used upon. It has only like on update, bind, destroyed hooks that you can call when there is something. And in my whole experience, so it's around 2 years of using Vue, I only had to write like 2 custom directives because most of the time, or almost all the time, you will be using components as the way to abstract and like the way to reuse your code in different contexts. So two-way data binding. Yeah, you probably recognize if someone has a background with Angular, it looks very similar to ng model, and it was two-way data binding there. But in Vue, it is actually just syntax sugar for passing a prop and listening to the event where we just assign the new value to the user, to the prop. So it is all within the container, the prop, but because it also works with components, so you can do things like this. You can instead of just like passing a prop and then passing a callback function that will update the prop in the parent, you can just use this, and it is actually quite useful if you don't need like state management. But also, speaking of state, another of the concerns is mutable state, which is a lot of people claim it's wrong, it's bad, it's the source of everything wrong about the web applications. And I actually quite agree about it because before, like in my experience with, I won't mention the frameworks, there was no guidance how to actually, when to mutate, where to mutate things. So if you had everything connected, it could get a bit messy or very messy. But right now, like we are living in this component-based post-Flux era, and like who doesn't know the store pattern? Yeah, like everybody knows, or people just don't want to stand out. And yeah, since we know that, we can actually look for perks of having the mutable state. And actually, the perk is that we can observe it in a very smart way. And this is how it works in Vue. It works. Great. So when you initialize the data of Vue, it is transformed into a set of getters and setters, right? Whenever you run the setter, like let's say there's this render function, and a render function is a watcher, another bad name. And whenever our render function calls the data, calls the getter, it will touch the getter, and the getter then notifies, like saves the context in which it was called as, like let's say this render function is my dependency. Like it depends on me. And when there is the setter, when the setter is called, so just to change to assign a new value, we are notifying the watcher so it can trigger a re-render. And I hope you already follow that actually if you have a render function and you have conditionals within and you use different parts of your state there, and if the render function doesn't reach this, the parts that didn't pass the conditional, like in, let's say, the else block never evaluated, it won't register as a dependency. So you can update the prop that was used there, or the data, and it won't trigger our re-render. It's actually quite smart. And yeah, obviously the re-renders are batched. There is a scheduler within Vue that optimizes to make those re-renders as smooth as possible. So yeah, there are these things like computed properties. You probably know them if you used Ember before, and Knockout. or mobx, which basically works on a very, very similar way. Like it's basically the same, just different code. And what are computed properties? This is a way to, like selectors in Redux or reselect. That's basically the same, but smarter because you don't have to pass the properties that it depends on. And this is actually the same way it works with, like this is also a watcher, but it's lazy, so it will evaluate only if it is called. And it is cached, so whenever one of the dependencies, like we change this property, and it will either get the friends or the users, just like a very made-up example. And whenever the other thing changes, it won't trigger, it won't set the state of this computer property as dirty, so you will get always the cached property. So it's like memorization for free every time you use it. Yeah, I freaking love them. I can't live with them. Like if I look on other frameworks and they don't have computer properties that are that smart, I like cry a little. So actually, it means you don't have to write should component update like ever. You don't have to use pure component or think about it. It's done for you, like this. And yeah, state management, you can use Redux if you want or Flux or whatever, but Vue actually, it's an official package. It's called Vuejs, and it is based on it states it is based on the Elm architecture, but it mutates stuff, and it's split into the state, obviously, the actions where you can do the asynchronous stuff, and mutations where they have to be synchronized, and this is the part like reducers when you're just changing the state, and it should like change one thing the best. And they are actually quite tracked by the dev tools, which are quite nice. Oh, sorry. Yeah, it works like this, and you can time travel, even with mutable state. That's pretty neat. And the Vue DevTools have other tabs, other features, but I will leave it to you to explore them. So there is more. There's a very nice statement that Vue is built with developer experience, and I totally agree with it. But it was spoken in the context of Webpack, and it was said by Sean Larkin, one of the core team members of Webpack. You might have heard of him. He's quite popular. And yeah, code splitting. Thomas showed us how to do code splitting, right? So in Vue, like if you import a component, and let's say it is within a conditional, right? So this is a static import. It will be bundled into a bundle, or into a chunk, or whatever. But if you change it to this, it's already asynchronous, and it will be split into a different chunk, and that's it. That's the only change you have to do in your code to make the component load asynchronously. Because the templates or the render, like just the render functions, are able to handle either objects, because Vue components are objects until they are called by the render function or within the new Vue function, constructor. They can also handle functions that return promises. So that's the only thing you can do, you need to do to make them asynchronous. But there is also like fancy things, like you can do a computed property that based on the props will fetch a, this is a wizard step, and Webpack gives us the possibility to create chunks from the files within a catalog or dictionary. Oh, sorry, directory, sorry. Yeah, and whenever the props changes, a different function is returned here, so a different promise, and it is resolved here. I could write a render function here, but this is actually how it is in the templates, and just want you to embrace the templates again. It will be, this thing will transfer into the component that is fetched here. And of course, if this if you move to the previous step that was already fetched, it won't fetch again. It will just return the object that already was fetched, that component. And single file components, they are quite what makes Vue what it is. Yeah, they are split for like, you have the templates there, the script, and the styles. So for the templates, you can use whatever preprocessor you want. That's pretty nice. You can use, by default, the script part is using Babel. So you can write E6 code there. But if you would like to use TypeScript, you just type lang equals TypeScript, and then you have TypeScript there. Of course, you have to configure Webpack to use the TypeScript loader or whatever. You have linting there across the whole file. If you're using Visual Studio Code, you will also get linting, at least parts of it, in the templates. There is also component scoped CSS, which looks like this. You can use actually like Sass there. It is quite useful, like if you like Sass like I do. You can use media queries without like any camel case or functions or anything. But yes, you can use the CSS in JS stuff, but it is usually not needed because this is actually a very nice solution that just works. And if you add the scoped, the CSS here will be scoped to this component only. And yeah, you can use CSS modules if you'd like. By just, instead of writing scoped, you just add module, and it will be transferred into a CSS module. Of course, you can use, because this is just regular CSS, you can use post CSS, CSS next to do some like auto prefixing, or using like more new features of CSS that are also quite cool. And yeah, you can extract the CSS, and if you are doing server-side rendering, Vue will actually generate the critical CSS for what was rendered and inject it into the head so you don't have to worry about it. And like everything else will be automatically added as async or defer. So you don't have to worry about what the previous speaker was been talking about. And yeah, you got the hot reloading, and you can modify actually what is in there. You can add your own blocks, like docs or tests or actually whatever you want. And you can do with this, like generate your documentation for each component by writing it in this place. Yeah, it can get a bit big, but it's like with React, I guess. If you like to split your things, and I recommend you to do this, if you like to split your things into very granular components, then those files won't get that big. And yeah, there's some news about maybe not news, but facts about the community. Vue is actually, it was the most start project on GitHub in last year. And we also have very nice, because I think this is showing how many people actually are using. And in comparison to the Redux DevTools, it's just like 30,000 less. So it's quite nice. Yeah, what's in the future? We will get a brand new Vue test tutors library that should help us with writing tests. They're quite easy to write right now, but it can be better because the framework is all about developer experience. And we'll also get a better TypeScript support because right now TypeScript gets a little dizzy when it has to work on this context, and it is dynamic because we are binding things. We are binding this to different places in the object, so to different functions in the objects. Okay, so and there's a new command line tool that will be shipped probably early next year, I hope. And actually, I haven't mentioned it here, but I just learned about it recently. There is a cookbook in progress on the official documentation that will show like more complex implementations, like use cases for Vue and how you can handle them. So, and if you were wondering what companies are actually using Vue, like most of those very big Chinese companies, but also some of the well-known Western companies like Adobe, Behance, which is actually part of Adobe, but also GitLab, NBC, CodeShip, Vuejs, and SAS, and there are much more smaller companies, but I probably won't have the time to actually because I just learn about new companies that are using Vue each day. So that's it. I just have one takeaway for you, so you don't think about me like I'm just presenting this new talk about this new, or maybe not so new framework, and just you should probably all migrate to it. No, actually, if you are using React, you can do most of the almost everything, or everything I just showed you in React. So if you have an application in React, don't migrate. It's there's rather no reasons for it. If you have you are starting a new project, consider Vue. It might be fitting the project's needs. And if you have a very old application, legacy code with, let's say, Angular 1 or legacy and Angular 1, it's not so far away in the past. I was using it. Anyway, if you have a jQuery and Rails application or just a multi-page app, it might be very smooth to migrate to Vue and just give it a try. And I actually don't know anyone who tried it and said, I would something, I tried it, but I moved back to React or to Angular or something. Nobody ever said that to me. So so try it, and maybe you will be the first to say it. Thank you. Any questions?
You had example with styles. Mm-hmm. They were scoped.
Yeah.
And my question is this scoped attribute the spec, which was withdrawn from the specs, this scoped attribute, or is it something added by Webpack?
That's just what Vue does. The Vue loader does. It adds to the DOM elements an attribute that is unique, and each of the CSS classes selectors you have are having this attribute added. So
so it's scoped.
Yeah.
Okay.
Are there any plans for Vue.js VR?
Actually, I've seen an example for, it wasn't VR, it was AR, actually. And there's some examples for using A-frame with Vue, and it worked quite smooth. So, but I think there's more of AR than Vue. If you're using React with AR, that's probably very similar.
Nice.
But you can do it. Yeah, and maybe if you're interested, there is something like Vue native. And the Alibaba company and several other companies are using it on production, but the English documentation is quite lacking. From what I know, it is stuck right now in the Apache Foundation because of the license, Facebook license. But I hope they get through it, and we will have our own Vue native implementation. Any other questions? Okay, I'm afraid no. Thank you very much.